We are live.
This is Senate Appropriations, January 20th. We're going through budget adjustment items, requests. It's governor's agencies. So today we have Department of Public Safety. So please introduce yourself for the record and let us know what your budget adjustment.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. My name is Jennifer Morrison. I'm the Commissioner of Public Safety. And we have a relatively straightforward budget adjustment request for FY26. I'm going to quickly introduce the folks who are with me. So in case you have questions, you'll know that they're here. But Director Richard Hallenbeck, we call him Rick, who is the Director of Finance and Administration, will be doing most of the talking. If you have questions related to the state police, Colonel Matthew Birmingham and Lieutenant Colonel Sean Lone are here. If you have questions about the request in the Vermont Crime Information Center, Director Jeff Wallen is with me. And my ever steady wingman, Dan Batesy, is the Deputy Commissioner of this operation. And we're both here to fill in blanks as needed. So with your permission, I'll turn things over to Director Hallenbeck.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And do you know everybody here or do you need introduction?
I know everyone in the room, so
Good.
thank you.
Good afternoon. If the chair is okay with it, I'll share my screen and I'll open up the crosswalk document that was should have already been shared with me.
Assume we also have it online. It has we also have this big worksheet that Commissioner Gresham did, so it's helpful that we have the numbers to cross-reference.
Sure. And for the record, Rick Hallenbeck, Director of Finance and Administration at Public Safety. If you'd like me to just walk you through this line by line, that can be it.
Yeah, I mean, if there's lines that are very small, we don't need to go over everyone, but
It's there's very few lines to the request, so I'll combine the first two. And
if it's all zeros, you don't have to go.
So the first two lines in administration are related to a revenue shortfall in our interdepartmental fund, which is usually the cost center for our indirect cost rate. I also provided the committee with a little handout that kind of gives an overview of our indirect cost rate and how we use it. But basically the indirect cost rate, it's a ratio of the direct versus indirect cost. You know, an example of a direct cost would be like a trooper on the road is a direct cost of the state police, whereas an indirect cost would be like the commissioner and myself, where we're involved in the administration of all of the programs.
Do you apply that only to federal funds, I assume?
We apply it to federal funds, special funds, and sometimes interdepartmental grants that are ultimately a federal source. It's developed annually by DPS administration and approved by our cognizant agency, FEMA. And when we draw that revenue based on the rate, the funds are spent on staffing costs and internal service fees. And so you can see the two operating expenses are for vision and human resources. Those are the internal service fees. And the requested is $760,000. You may recall last year we had a similar request. The amount was just over $1.1 million in our FY25 budget adjustment.
It's fine.
With the chair's permission, I can move to B209.
Yes.
For the state police overtime line item. $865,762 is our projected line item shortfall for 26 for both sworn and civilian overtime, which the majority of that occurs on public safety answering points or dispatch centers. The cost increase is primarily driven by three factors. One, we had a reclassification of troopers last year, so that changed their overtime rate, by changing the regular rate, their overtime rate will also increase. And maintaining proper staffing in the public safety answering points, that accounts for roughly a third of the state police overtime. And there's also 100,000 for the patrols that we had to perform in Burlington, right around the time of the holidays.
Was it just the holidays? Was that a part of this? That was all volunteer overtime.
It was late November through December 31st is what I recall. Whether or not that I have to assume that was all
And of that 865, that overtime, how much was for Burlington? Was that all of it, or is it just other normal?
100,000 of the 865, so that's roughly.
Okay. Well, is this a normal budget adjustment for overtime, or was there something else? I assumed a lot more than 100,000 was for that. What else? Really,
The state police trooper reclassifications increased the rates. Was costing more for the same number of hours, and then dispatchers, their overtime, they account for about a third of the state police.
because when we made the budget, we didn't account for that increase. Could we put that in this year?
Yes, we did increase overtime in the FY27.
I just assumed when we did the budget, we would have accounted for the change in the reclassification, but maybe the time is just.
Yeah, this is just based on what our projections are showing us. We did our due diligence in building the overtime budget for 2026. When we're preparing the big bill. This is just the difference between the preceding practice and roughly the first quarter here.
Okay. And you're saying it's the rate, not change in strategies. You're like, if there was a reduction in force, like you just didn't have enough staff, so people had to do overtime to meet the need.
Yeah, there isn't enough staff in both the sworn and civilian side, the dispatchers. So
In the dispatchers or with
in the public safety answering points, that's where the dispatchers work. And
the sworn officers, do we have any like large vacancies in the numbers? Again, in the past, there's
yeah,
been an issue.
you may want to have the colonel weigh in on that. I know we have vacancies in both civilian and sworn.
Okay. Well, we can go over the budget stuff and then maybe look.
Great.
So there are lots of.
Let me raise this question exactly. I'm thinking about the operating expenses up, and I'm not objecting to anything, but sometimes when numbers are both too round or too precise, it makes me just question things. And so in terms of the 760,000 for the vision and then the human services, are you thinking like the 760,000 is the right number, and you're just dividing like it's a third here? Like, how did you end up with the numbers for the human services?
Great question.
Yeah.
So the line items that I chose are somewhat arbitrary because this is just a revenue shortfall. And so I picked two of the internal service fee amounts that add up to the 760,000 or short. My recollection is when we calculated, it's like 759,000 and change.
Okay.
I forgot the exact number.
Okay.
We rounded it to 760,000.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sorry to go back to that one, but did you change the indirect rate like because of the shortfall? Like when did I hear you say that you did change the indirect rates to kind of avoid having problem next?
We haven't changed it to avoid this problem. The rate is calculated, so it's the ratio of our direct and indirect costs. So we calculate it, and it does fluctuate year to year. But after we calculate it, then we send it to FEMA, and they have to use the rate. But yeah, it would be ideal if we could just simply pick the rate to get the revenue share fee, but
Right.
we're not able to do that.
But maybe with your total budget, 760 isn't a big percentage, and you're not off that much. I assume at some point, if you had to come back every year to adjust, we would recalculate it to see if you have the right number.
Yeah, and part of the issue is not just the rate. There are certain parameters, like some federal grants will only let you do 10% of the grants, or if your rate's 1.5, you only get 10%. And there's a cap on contracts and grants. So if we have a program with a bunch of large grants and contracts, we can only draw the first 25,000 or draw a rate on the first 25,000.
Okay, yeah. I understand. Okay.
So the next appropriation, B210, criminal justice services appropriations, and more specifically, the Wrong Crime Information Center. We're looking for a $570,000 increase in the contracts, other contracts with third-party services. The contract we have with computer projects that don't have is for the DPS message switch. Basic overview of the switch is it facilitates the electronic transmission and receive of restricted data to authorized users. The existing hardware was past end of life, leading to an inability to both get parts and remove from the system and apply security patches and updates. So rather than purchasing all new hardware for an on-prem solution, the cloud option was chosen. And at the time we received this criminal history record check fund had the cash available. But that cash balance didn't go over the years in the length of time it took for the project to come to fruition.
Good question.
Yeah, some more.
So, this new system's cloud-based,
Yes.
and so, I assume that I just feel like the need to ask the question, which is that, it's all up to date with, security features, multi-country authentication, things like that.
It did go through the agency of digital services, so
Okay,
most certainly got it to the side.
amazing. Thank you.
Are you expecting a savings by going on, sorry, Commissioner, or savings by going in the cloud, like in the long term? Is that one of the reasons to switch to cloud and physical?
It was less expensive than building another on-prem solution. But in the long term, this system is actually going to need to be replaced, and so there'll be RFPs soon for that,
For the cloud system or for the?
for the cloud system. That contract, we've extended it several times, and looking at future costs, it may not be prudent to stay with the same vendor.
Commissioner?
Any information, any system that transmits CJIS, criminal justice information systems, right, has extremely high security requirements, and we're audited on those by the FBI and other partners. So we absolutely have protocols. And if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, Director Wallinger, man, likewise, if anyone really wants to talk about the message switch and why this was antiquated, and it remains antiquated, even with a shift to the cloud, I want to be clear. And it took years to get to this leap to move it to the cloud. It is still antiquated and in need of replacement. But the message switch is an absolutely foundational piece of the way we move information, not just between law enforcement agencies, but by anyone who has the authority to access criminal justice information. And that's far more than just police agencies.
That is my question.
Good.
So that ends this page. There's nothing for emergency management. Warfare and safety or defense plan. Directed attention to the very bottom of the page where I added section to be 101 for fund transfers. This is for the I mentioned it's under the criminal history record check fund that the balance had been moving. We did have a budget adjustment, a budget adjustment last year that transferred some funding to the criminal history record check fund, and we do need another this year. It's an amount of $1.5 million, and that's what our projected deficit is for fiscal 26.
It seems like since it's been 2 years in a row, have you or the governor thought about raising the fee that people pay to get the criminal records checks so that you don't have a deficit in that fund? Would that is that the problem that you're not charging enough for it? That's why you have deficit.
We have explored that and we are similar with other states. By average, there are some that would charge more, some that charge less. But we're kind of in there, in line with what other states charge.
Where are you transferring the money from?
It's a general fund transfer to criminal history record checks.
What do you charge now? So
That's $30 to get an online criminal conviction report.
how much would it need to be to cover this $1 million bill? Like how many do you do? Like do you have that in your head?
Yeah, I can get that.
Jeff might.
For the record, Jeffrey Wallen, Director of Vermont Crime Information Center. We process, I was just looking at the numbers, so I should have it at the tip of my tongue, and I don't have it. We process somewhere in the order of magnitude of 1 to 200,000 revenue generating checks per year for that fee. There's another similar number that are charged at no cost to local agencies that provide the care for the elderly, children, and those with disabilities for that. So it's a fairly large number. Most of those checks, based on our analysis, are done by out-of-state background check companies. They're doing like housing, employment checks, etc., where an individual indicates they've lived or worked in Vermont, whatever their metric is. So they actually have an agreement with ADS to do, a billing structure there, and we receive those funds. So
maybe even just a $10 increase would possibly get close to for raising its deficit.
you'd have to look at everything that goes into that particular fund. There may be some items in there that we want to look at what's the most appropriate place to pull the funding from, but we could do some kind of analysis of that.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what the fee would need to be to cover that, especially since a lot of Vermonters aren't paying.
Are you more interested in making the fund solvent or in figuring out other category? There are many categories of people who use this service that don't pay at all. So, and we don't have the ability to charge them.
It would be good to see that list. Yeah, maybe we would agree with it, maybe we wouldn't, but that's definitely two sides of the ledger there. So yeah.
Okay, we can take that back and crunch some numbers.
Okay, Senator Norris.
So just so I know, I'm gonna ask there are several people in here. So you're talking about a Vermont criminal records check versus the fingerprinting, which is what, $25 for the fingerprints by statute?
So Senator, thank you for that. There are two different functions that VCIC fills in that role, and they're essentially unrelated to one another. So the online conviction reports, where anyone can go on for a commercial purpose or just curiosity, name, date of birth, see if an individual has any convictions in Vermont, and that's $30. That is separate from the fingerprint check process that we do, which is roughly 20,000 or so per year for civil purposes. So nurses, teachers, childcare workers, real estate appraisers, the various entities that are subject to that. There is a fee up to $35 to the local agency to take the prints can charge, and none of that money comes to VCIC. We're also passed through to the FBI for the fingerprint portion of their check. We do retain roughly $2 per check for that, but we receive no other revenue for processing fingerprints. So all the fingerprint operations are supported by the online conviction report revenue.
Okay, thank you.
So that fee just stays like if you go to the sheriff's office, uses that fee to cover their costs to do the fingerprinting.
That's correct. So yes.
And then they also control. Well, the complaint I hear about fingerprinting is how long it takes.
Whole nother story.
That's nothing that you
We
guys have.
discovered that.
We are deeply involved.
Okay. Okay. Jennifer.
Could you give an example of someone who wouldn't be required to pay or just doesn't pay, and maybe one that would? Just, and maybe what the ratio is? What's the ratio of people who pay the $30 and don't?
So the ratio between the two groups, it's roughly 50%. It varies a little bit year by year, the 40s, high 40s, but I call it 50 just for averages approximately. We do see that number year to year changes a little bit for that. And then the type of agency that pays the fee again, and we see that in New York and California, these large background check companies that do it for leasing, for employment, that do a commercial service that run that. So they do pay that $30 fee. An entity that wouldn't would be, for example, a local agency that provides meals and support and healthcare support to seniors, doing check-ins, things like that. They provide care to the elderly.
So, for example, would it be O&D rides for public transit.
Volunteer rides for public transit.
So if it's determined that they're providing care or care placement, which is a federal definition, to that individual, so we have to look at that particular and what they're doing.
I want to see the list because they complain a lot about volunteer drivers taking people to dialysis having to pay.
Pay for the background.
They pay for the background.
They might pay for the fingerprints.
No, I don't know whether they charge or not, but there's a fair amount that people that volunteer their time for this have to pay for background checks.
What we often see is, again, there's a federal, the definition of care or care placement comes from a federal rule, so that's what we default to. And what we'll see is, giving an example, we've worked a lot with some of I'll use the colloquial term Meals on Wheels, where simply dropping off a meal is not considered care, but they almost all do welfare checks, provide reference and resources. Once we work with them on that, okay, it becomes clear they're not just dropping off a plate of food and taking the dirty one. They're doing a lot more than that.
I get all of that, and Senator Lyons and I both have a bill on that, and because they do get charged in that, and there's a piece of, it's a zero-sum game in here, because when you get to this table, we're either going to pay for it because you've done it, or it comes out of the general fund someplace else to pay through the AAAs to do it. So for us at this table, it's almost a zero-sum game.
That's why it'd be good to see the list. So
Yes, we'd be happy to provide a breakdown for you. And again, remembering that there's sort of two lanes when we're talking about these things. One is a fingerprint supported background check, which is very different than running a criminal history check.
Yep.
Right. You guys just deal with the, as far as budget goes, into the second one, criminal background check.
We deal with both. We deal with both.
But as far as the fee goes, don't you just charge for the second one, not the fingerprint? Is that what you said?
So the fingerprinting, there's the up to $35 charge that the agency taking the prints can charge. Again, that's strictly within the agency. The federal government charges it's generally $12 to process fingerprints, and we retain about $2 of that charge. So if we do 20,000 fingerprints per year, that's about $40,000 in revenue we retain.
And that's something that the feds just say, we'll give you $2. It's not like you're dictating. Some states, like we have less ability to die on that. Okay. Thank you.
So is this, I'll talk by my, Jeff, is this, the monies that have been located through DCF, is that updating their system, is that just for fingerprints, or is it for record checks and fingerprints?
So the money that DCF has received to modernize the fingerprint process is strictly for that fingerprint process. Essentially, the online name and date of birth conviction, it's near real time. If you go on and put Jeff Wallen 12973 and hit enter, within 10 seconds you get a result. It's all automatic. So there's no real lag time there. That happens very, very quickly. It's very rare that we have any issues where two people with the same name and date of birth come up. And when we do, then we assist that agency to square that away. It's the fingerprinting, there's a lot more manual process, and fingerprinting takes.
That was the
budget.
That's what I have.
Yeah, I would be interested in a couple of questions for. And then I have a question about PSAP employment. We deal with people. Does that be better for you as well?
Fire away. I'll answer whatever you have.
If you want to, if you're done, then you can have it sit there. That's okay with me. Introduce yourself.
Yes, Matthew Birmingham, I'm the Director of Safety.
Thanks for being here, and maybe it's a little bit off from the budget, but since you're here, we can ask questions about.
Absolutely.
So I know that I think I saw something about PSAPs, like a revolving door. It's difficult.
Yeah, we have two, the PSAPs are the public safety answering points for the 911 system. There's 6 of them in the state. We have 2. We call them our emergency communication centers, because they do more than just answer 911 calls. They're also dispatch centers. So we have 2 of them in the state police. We have the one in Williston and the one in Westminster. And they are staffed by a civilian or a non-sworn staff and we have had a tremendous difficulty over the last 5 years staffing them. So what we've had to do is work with the union to adjust pay. We've had to pay them overtime. They work 12-hour shifts and 4 of those hours are on overtime, because we have to cover the 24-hour clock. The staffing has improved, I'm happy to say, but it's still a challenge, and it costs money to run, when you have that vacancy rate and the turnover rate, because of the amount of work that they're doing. It does burn people out fairly quickly. But we have stabilized in that regard, but it's still a challenge. On the sworn side, for the troopers, we're about 17% vacancy rate. We have 56 vacancies today, out of about 322 sworn positions. So we are covering a lot of.
That seems better than it was.
It is better than it was. We are improving. Yes, we were almost as high as 70 at one point. So we've had the last few classes have been substantially larger, the police academy classes.
But you have one starting soon.
We have one in right now. There's 12 people in it, and the one prior to that was 14, and the one prior to that was 14. But 2020, 2018 is where 2019 is where it really started to plummet. We were seeing classes of 5 and 6, so that was unsustainable. Then we had a net loss of state troopers every year from 2019. So last year was the first year we hired more than we lost. So that's positive, but we're still in the hole. So we do cover a lot of our shifts on overtime because again, we have to cover the shifts, and that's the only way to do it. So to answer your question earlier, I think that's important about the reclassification. That did not hit our books until June. So the legislature was not in session. So that's why it didn't appear on the 26th budget request. And it was retroactive to September of 24, because that's when it was filed. The reclassification was filed by it was a management reclassification. And so it did not hit our books until 26.
And Dave Morgan's were they part of that? They had their own.
They were not. It was well, that's not true. It was a there were, yes, they were. It was a statewide law enforcement reclassification review by all agencies. And game wardens and state police moved the most in that reclassification process. So that was substantial in terms of budget pressure for us because all their base pay moved up and therefore all their overtime pay moves up as well, and we couldn't absorb it. And again, we're covering shifts on overtime, our shift, and then we had troopers in Burlington for at least 2 months on overtime, and those were voluntary shifts. Troopers signed up for those on their own.
And the other overtime is not voluntary because you just have to cover the shifts.
Correct. So, well, it's not voluntary from a management standpoint, meaning they have to be filled, but we try and get troopers to agree to work them instead of force them to work, because that's the last thing we want to do, because that's the quick way to burn people out. So,
yeah, as corrections is found out.
yes, yeah. So we prefer, our first hope is that we open the shifts up that we need as people sign up on their own because they're getting paid overtime, and that's where we're at currently. So we are not mandating coverage of these shifts, but we had when we were at 70 vacancies for as long as we were, we did have a rotation where you basically your number came up at some point. You had to sign up for a shift every couple of months. But you had choice on where and when. We moved past that, and now it's just a voluntary sign up, which is important to us because that's a quick way to burn your workforce out.
No, I'm glad to hear that the vacancies have decreased, but I didn't know that we were having similar problem with dispatchers.
Yes.
And I didn't know if there's something that's changed, because I think sworn officers, things have changed since 2019. But I don't know if the PSAPs have had it, if they're just getting, why do you think you're having more turnover with the
the complexities of that job make it very challenging and very.
Has it gotten worse though? It just seems
No, we've stabilized the complexities of it, and I don't want to get too far into this because it's a complicated conversation that can get a lot bigger really fast in terms of dispatching responsibilities. But we have when I back you up about the 911 and dispatching, so it's kind of a dual answer dispatching system where we both answer 911 calls and then we dispatch the entities out into the world, whether it's fire, police, or EMS. So we don't just dispatch for the state police. We dispatch for a lot of municipal agencies,
Fire.
fire, and EMS and police agencies, and the complexities of that as a employee can be very challenging, because you have to learn a lot. You have to learn about 911, you have to learn about dispatching, then you have to learn there's a lot of different nuances for every single entity has their own way of being dispatched, and there's fire, there's EMS, and it can be complicated. We've done a lot of work to try and shed a lot of that complexity by working with a lot of the towns and the entities that we dispatch for, to try and not simplify it, but make it easier on the employees. And with the pay adjustments, I mean, there's been quite a substantial increase in pay for our dispatchers. And that is obviously an incentive in a lot of ways. So those two things combined have stabilized our situation.
And they're state employees.
They are state logistics, and they work for the state police and the Department of Public Safety.
Is that, Commissioner, that's the study that we like to talk about with does that get into that, or that's just dealing with the towers? And I know you were
It's
hoping.
okay, it's okay, Dan, you'll be all right.
I try not to open up the.
No, if that got into that level,
Yes.
we're just talking about the
Talk about a situation that can get really big, really
Yeah.
fast. Yes, the overall architecture of the way both 911 calls and dispatching have been talked about, although the Public Safety Communications Task Force was tasked with the dispatching side of it, not the 911 system.
Right.
So there will be recommendations forthcoming from that
Does
task
it get
force.
down to like how to keep
It does, but it's a little bit of a menu, better, really better and best. But there's also like, here are the things you can do in a short term, some low hanging fruit about standardizing some things versus the really big things that get really expensive really fast.
And when is that, these recommendations?
Within 2 weeks, I think.
Okay, great.
So Dan has been going as co-chair for the last 7 months, so that I could get up on the balcony and represent DPS's best interest as opposed to being the co-chair of the task force, because there are going to be recommendations coming from the task force that we don't agree with.
Did Dan
So-
combat pay for that?
Well, I didn't for 2 years, so.
Mr. Chair, Dan Bates, Deputy Commissioner. I'll just add that these challenges also represent sort of a broad notion of recruitment and retention issues across public safety, not just dispatchers, fire, EMS, law enforcement in general. None of them are immune to these challenges. I think you're seeing that in addition to the specific local issues that we're dealing with.
And I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention that in the PSAP space, we're at full staffing in Westminster, which is the first time in my tenure that has happened. That's not the case in Williston. There's nine current vacancies, which is very representative of the other job options that are available in Chittenden County that don't require nights, weekends, and holidays and people at their worst moment and scary, terrible stuff on a constant every time you pick up the phone.
Yeah.
So I think that we have to recognize that the job market's very different in one area versus the other, and Williston will probably always be one that we're constantly trying to recruit, hire, and retain for.
Because you have to pay them the same.
Of course,
Yeah, right. Like regardless of where
it
they.
depends on their contract.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's more
contract is,
opportunity if they're unhappy in their job in Wilson, there's more opportunity for them to get another job pretty quick in that job market. In Westminster, it's not as easy. So they end up staying longer and making a career out of it. Generally, there's always exceptions.
Is the actual job tougher in Williston than it is in Westminster? Same type of job, but I mean, is it more?
I've never done their job, so I
Yeah,
can't begin to speak
it's
for
the
them.
same, it is the same job. They have different entities they dispatch for. So Westminster handles generally the southern part of the state. And Wilson handles the northern part of the state, but they all have EMS, they all have fire, they all have law enforcement.
You all fall over, like, so you could be in Wilson and get a call from Brattleboro.
Yes, because there's redundancy and backup. And so if one center is overwhelmed with calls, it will automatically default to the second center. But in theory, you could take a dispatcher in Westminster and they could plug right in Williston and not blink an eye and be able to do that job interchangeably. In theory.
Any other questions for public safety? All right. Thanks for your service.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, we don't have anything else. We have one more